Welcome, everybody, to Beyond the Blocks, episode 2. We got a great show today. Very excited to be here with a great crew of guests. Today, we're going to be talking about the future of the digital art market. And with the last couple of weeks, the craziness, I think it's a good time to check in on things. So I'm here. I'm joined by a great panel of guests here. We have Eli Schienman, art broker, digital art broker. We have Derek, collab partner at Collab and Currency. And then we have the one and only Zeneca, who everyone knows, Zen Academy, and also just a really legend in the NFT and just overall crypto community. So welcome, gentlemen, to the show.
Yeah, great to be here, man.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Yeah, likewise. Stoked.
Awesome.
Thank you for bringing us together.
Yeah, I'm excited about this topic. I think it's a really good topic, and one that a lot of people have a lot of interest in. So I'd like to just kick us off by talking about. Let's just start off with you, Eli. This is something that I've been really wanting to ask you lately, and talk about, and we can open up to the group after. I think the last year or so, I've noticed more and more, I follow you on X, and you're always posting some great, art and just in general. And we obviously worked together at Proof at one point, and we're involved in the Grails exhibitions, all these things. And you've kind of now transitioned into this role of being like a digital art broker. And I see you posting these high-end sales of this amazing art. X copy, fidenzas, etc., autoglyphs. And I'm curious, one, how did this new profession come about? And did you just sense a need for it and jump into it? And maybe you could tell us a little bit more about this kind of emerging, line of work.
Yeah, sure. So thanks, Raven and Zen and Derek. Great to, I think maybe we've actually done a podcast at some point way back together. So great to get this crew back together. And Raven, appreciate you doing that. So I mean, in terms of why I'm doing this or how this became something that I'm doing, it's really on the back of 4 or 5 years of fostering real human relationships with many collectors and artists in our space. And so while at the end of the day, much of the work I've been doing is sort of transactional in nature, it's sort of embedded in, as I said, these real relationships and real meaning that's been cultivated over a number of years. And part of that chapter, of course, being at Proof. Now, in terms of why are we maybe seeing more of these high-end sales moving through so-called brokers or dealers? I think it's a couple of things. One, most of those collections that you mentioned, autoglyphs, early X copy, squiggles, lost Robbies, those are quite hard to find in many cases. They're from sort of 2018 to 2021 range. And so by extension, you have a number of the collectors of those assets, of those NFTs, of those artworks, not deeply invested in the day-to-day market activity of those collections and of NFTs and of digital art. And so by extension, when you have buyers coming to the table, people interested in acquiring those artworks, it opens this question of how do you find someone who's willing to part with an artwork at a reasonable price? There's always a market price across all of these collections, but there's often someone who fits that description that I just gave you, which is has one of these artworks, isn't deeply invested in the day-to-day, has been holding it now for a number of years, and maybe in fact is sort of open-minded about passing on the stewardship of that artwork to someone else. And so that's, I think, the most interesting element of the work I've been doing. And to just illustrate that very quickly, Raven, there was this artwork called Mortal. It's a 1 of 10 edition by X Copy, very difficult to track down. Most of those 10 are locked away for many years. And finding one for a collector who was interested in acquiring the work required going through Etherscan, finding who this nifty gateway wallet had initially interacted with, tracking down that person. That person happened to know the holder of Mortal, who was totally offline, but was an IRL friend of that individual. And so piecing that together for a collector to be able to acquire artwork and the seller have a great outcome, I think is sort of most interesting dimension. And more broadly, back to my first point, I think that's why we're seeing more of this. The Alien that just sold is another example of this. An anon collector going to another unknown collector, and a broker being able to sort of facilitate that acquisition by extension.
Yeah, that's amazing. And I think one thing that you're just really great at is you have just a deep knowledge of this space, and also you have a lot of great artist connections, collectors connections. So I know that plays a great role in this, and it's going to be interesting to see how this is already shaping kind of the digital art market. And it's interesting to see kind of these backroom deals kind of happening and things like that. And I know that in the kind of traditional art world, this is the norm, right? The asymmetry of information is how gallerists in the traditional art world they operate, right? So it's interesting for us to in this decentralized world to kind of going back to a little bit of centralization around some of this stuff, at least with the negotiation and things like that. Anyone else
Yeah.
want to chime in on this topic?
Zen, you want to jump in first?
No, you go ahead. I'm still formulating thoughts.
Yeah, I'll just say, yeah, maybe just to take that last point you made there, Raven, which is like a little bit of centralization sprinkled on top. You know, I think I think most people that are listening, and certainly the folks that are on the roundtable here would probably like believe in the merits of decentralization. It's kind of like why we're all here, and um, I think sometimes the idea of centralization in part can rub people the wrong way. But I think maybe the tailored view that I've come to appreciate is, as long as the plumbing has been reworked in a way that's fair, incredibly neutral and transparent, and allows for sovereign ownership, I think people should be willing to kind of like pay like for product or service value that gets built on top of this if it serves a job that needs to be done. And so, the work that Eli does, the work that Fountain does, some of like the brokers that are coming into the space to maybe facilitate smoother markets for kind of these opaque long tail objects, like that stuff is valuable, and there should be, they should have the ability to kind of like charge for that value, given the fact that the plumbing is still fair underneath. So I tolerate like and love that type of centralization. I think it's important and it's healthy for everything that we're doing here and all the hard work that's being done here to kind of grow.
Yeah, I pretty much agree with all of that. I mean, in so many areas of crypto, you have these elements of centralization, which I mean, like centralized exchanges being a great example. Like they popped up because of how difficult it was for the average person to buy or sell crypto, and I think we could probably all agree that it has significantly helped the adoption of crypto globally, and it's not a bad thing. And you see that time and time again, where a little bit of centralization is just not a bad thing for me. To me, it's just necessary in terms of growing. So yeah, awesome to see.
Yeah, and Raven, if I could just add
Yeah,
one
go
additional
ahead.
thought to sort of take that forward, I actually sort of think like the end game of all of this is to not be facilitating between existing NFT and crypto participants. It's to be facilitating for someone where this is like uh, very foreign, and there's a lot of friction in their mind. And on one side, probably in many cases, the sort of selling side, that's a crypto native collector, but then sort of being able to facilitate into a net new cohort of collectors. That's the end game. For now, it's mostly within existing participants, but I think that's where we're going.
Great. Yeah. Yeah. I'd like to move us on to kind of our next topic, which actually is a great segue, because I think one of the things that maybe is holding us back, actually, like when I say us, like kind of these digital art, as digital art collectors, digital art, appreciators, et cetera, artists, is actually kind of the amount of volatility and, this speculation culture that comes with crypto, right? And this isn't, I guess, this isn't uh, unique to crypto art or digital art, really. I mean, contemporary art can totally be volatile as well. But I do think there's some elements here, specifically around, the fact that much of this art is priced in Ethereum, or some L1 coin, and has these wild, uh, and when those coins kind of get really volatile, the art goes along with it, right? So people have floated this idea of maybe pricing these things in stable coins, or some other, basically, so that to kind of reduce the volatility and isolate, and insulate the digital art market from the overall crypto art market. And yeah, I'd like to discuss that. So maybe Zeneca, if you could start. I know that you're really into the stats and the overall crypto, macro, and meme coins that kind of boom and bust, and we see these 2021 with NFTs, etc. What do you think about this? How do you start to think about the digital art market and the crypto art market?
I think it's a really interesting space because on the one hand, you have artists and art collectors who, like you said, traditionally there's been some volatility, but it's not been this 24/7. There's a floor price that everyone can see, and the underlying asset class changes in value all the time. You have that group of people, and then you have like crypto degens, the people that are speculating on meme coins and trying to make as much money as possible, and just doing all sorts of, casino culture type things. And both groups are oftentimes buying or selling the same assets for different reasons. And I think it's not inherently a good or bad thing. It just is what it is. To me, the good part about it is the sort of this discoverability for and that sort of like pathway for like the degen to turn into the art collector. And I very much put myself in that category because pre-crypto, like I didn't own any art. I didn't particularly appreciate art. I would go to a random museum if I was traveling and that kind of stuff. But then I got into crypto to trade and make money. And then in that process, I discovered art blocks and generative art and fell in love with it. And now I live in an apartment where the walls are just covered with generative art because of that sort of journey that brought me along from being a degen into appreciating the art and from there on. So I think that that's sort of like the culture of trading these things and speculating on them will always exist, just like it did again in the traditional art market. But because of crypto being 24/7 and just so fast paced, it just feels a lot more visceral. But I still think overall it's a good thing for sort of art adoption and digital art adoption.
Great. Yeah, no, I 100% agree with that. And um, yeah, I think that's a really interesting take about not separating these. Does anyone have a different take, or do you agree with Zen, Eli, and Derek?
I'll jump in really quick. I totally agree with Zen. I'll take a different part of your question, just so I don't travel down the same road Zen just did. I think you did a great job. I think explaining how a lot of people approach and come into the space and how their interests evolve. Maybe I'll answer the kind of the point or the kind of the question you were asking there, Raven, about like denomination and like how these
Mm.
objects themselves are denominated. Um, I've written about this a little bit, but my view is like if you just like zoom out for a bit. I mean, we have been in like I would say a structural bidders market for about 3 years. And
Mm.
so what does that mean? It means like prices are, I mean, your sellers aren't really commanding like, yeah, the purchase price for many of these objects. It's really like they're the bidders that are coming in and expressing economic interest, and then these prices are recalibrating around that interest. And one feature of a bidder's market is they have the ability to denominate in whatever value they'd like. And while in a structural, let's call it bull market or seller's market, the opposite was true. And so I'm hesitant to like just call out recency bias and data points that are more recent and say like these should be valued in dollars. I just don't think that that's the correct framing. I think my gut tells me that for many of these scarce collections, When we return into a market structure where there are more buyers than sellers, then sellers will be able to command like the denominator in whatever denomination that they prefer. I don't think that that will exist for all crypto art or all NFTs, but I certainly believe that things like the alien punk that traded yesterday, or very rare squiggles, or fidenzas, as we move into kind of a different market structure as things change, I think the question is, how do sellers want to denominate these objects? And for many of them, their basis is in ETH, and they think about the value of these objects in ETH. And so it wouldn't surprise me in the least bit, just like thinking about my own behavior and thinking about other collectors, if as the market structure starts to turn from this structural bidders market to a structural sellers market, that the denomination also changes around some of these networks and around some of these objects. I think that's a controversial view, but it's kind of what my intuition is saying right now.
Yeah, I think that's a great point too. And it's not, and also too, it's not universal, right? Like there are some platforms and kind of the big auction houses, with the digital day sale going on right now. They're priced in USD. So and I'm sure there's some people that are doing the calculation of what's that in ETH, and in certain collections for sure, I think, CryptoPunks being one of them. I think anytime CryptoPunk gets in the $60,000 range USD, it seems people start paying attention to that and saying, "Hey, this looks cheap," and it historically has bounced off that mark a couple times now when ETH has kind of tanked. So, really interesting discussion on this. Eli, you got anything to add on this topic?
Yeah. I mean, maybe yeah, I'll sort of add the perspective of trying to sort of match make a buyer and a seller, and the challenges that often arise when, and this is very commonplace. One is denominated in ETH, and the other side is denominated in USD primarily. And you're trying to get to a number across both of those dimensions, and sometimes over like a week of conversation when those prices move considerably and substantively. And so sort of that illustrates, I think, Derek's point in the whole conversation here, in that there isn't a consensus yet on how we denominate and think about these objects. So that's sort of ongoing challenge where, as ETH moves, all of a sudden the USD price for a lost Robbie, for example, looks very attractive. But in ETH terms, maybe it's 2x a premium from the prior sale price. So I don't have any answers there yet, but just sort of a dynamic that certainly exists and persists in the market today.
Great. Yeah. So the next place I'd like us to go is, and I think those are all great answers on that as well. Is I'd like to talk about, you were just talking about, different types of buyers and some, outside buyers that maybe collect traditional art and are trying to get into digital art. They are, thinking of things in USD, and on the crypto art side, there's other collectors that are thinking of, you know, in crypto, right? I'm curious to think of kind of transitions now that we have, we're talking about those two types of buyers, is to kind of revisit this. I don't know if it's a debate or feeling, but ever since, NFTs and digital art kind of blew up in 2021, the narrative, this has been this narrative behind the scenes of, oh, just wait for the traditional art collectors to come along and they're going to buy up all our bags and we're going to all ride off into the sunset. And I think to the most part, that hasn't happened yet, right? Like, I think it definitely had, there's been many of them, but I think, if you could go to any major art fair and you go walk around, count how many digital pieces that you see. And spoiler alert, it's going to be very, very low. If there may be one piece or two piece. So what I'd like to bring to the kind of the floor here is, around the future collector. Is this the goal still to get traditional art collectors into the space, or is there a grander goal that maybe we can reach collectors that are not collectors right now? They don't own any art, maybe period, from someone from an artist that they actually know or anything like that. Is the I'd like to kind of get people's thoughts of who should we be targeting for growth of kind of the digital art market. Do you want to start, Eli?
Yeah,
This
sure.
round.
Yeah, sure. I have some thoughts. Let's see a couple of things. So one, I think there's this long tail and very persistent baggage from 21, 22 around NFTs and by extension, unfortunately, digital art. Now, I'm speaking in generalities. Digital art, as we all know, and our audience probably knows, and computer art has a long history prior to NFTs. But for the sake of this conversation, I'll sort of bundle those into one. So there's this baggage associated with 21 and 22 and the hype cycle that we saw, and then obviously sort of roller coaster of the market by extension. So I think that's part of it. Having a conversation with net new collectors that persists. I think secondarily, there's still a sort of legibility hurdle, meaning how do you make a digital artwork legible and sort of make sense to perhaps someone who's coming to the table initially sort of reticent or reserved and has a slightly more narrow view of what is collectible as a sort of high value artwork. And so there's a legibility question that we haven't totally solved as well. My view moving forward, to sort of more directly answer your question, Raven, is I think it's about contextualizing digital art that's on the blockchain as a fundamental part of the contemporary art world, right? Like that's the framing I think is most interesting. It's the sort of top artists using digital tools in their practice who are part of the contemporary art scene and art world and art market by extension. I think the way you sort of do that work is a lot of sort of hand-to-hand combat, right? It's getting in front of those collectors, getting in the right venues, and then doing what I said, which is showing work that is legible. I think too often collectors, perhaps outside of our space, have been told why this work is interesting, or it's been sort of intellectualized to them, rather than showing work where they're just sort of confronted by something that feels compelling and interesting and resonates as an artwork first and foremost. And yes, it also is sort of able to be transacted in these ways and has this value prop as well. So yeah, that's sort of how I think about sort of some of the paths towards onboarding those new collectors.
That's a great answer. Derek, I'd like to jump to you. I think, like Eli was saying, the institutions are kind of a part of this, right? Like it or not, they are gatekeepers of culture, at least in the art world. What are you seeing out there as far as institutional adoption? Do you think that's important? What are the barriers to that?
Yeah, I think Eli did a great job of kind of table setting what things look like in 2025. Like this movement happened pretty fast and furious, right? Like I think for folks that were maybe coming from more non-technical traditional spaces, like they had to reach a couple of conclusions very quickly. Like the first conclusion is that blockchains could be more than just like commodity money that lived on top of them. Two, that like you could now have a unique digital object that people could own like sovereignly without an intermediary. Three, that artists could use that technology to kind of create fine art. And then four, that like the economics of these things could one day kind of like be married to or replicate some of like the how the contemporary art markets function. And they had to do all that in like the last 3 years. Like that's a lot to chew on for anyone. So I think Eli said something about like contextualization. Like I feel very strongly that that's true. I'll also say a lot of it is just like getting them up to speed about how this technology works and how it can be applied. Um, I think the last piece is so much of, I know this is like heresy for like maybe more of like the purists who are making art for for crypto art's sake or for the technology's sake or for a very natively crypto audience. But like the reason why the contemporary art market is a $2 trillion asset class is because like people can preserve and store wealth in these things, much like they can other let's just call it financial instruments or financial assets. And it's non-correlated. It provides them like economic exposure to this asset that becomes kind of like a mixture in their overall like financial portfolio. And if you look purely at the numbers, there's millions of like high net worth individuals across the world. I think there's something like 600,000 ultra high net worth individuals across the world. It's with a liquid net worth of over 30 million. And the for many of them, they use the contemporary art market as a way to kind of like diversify and create kind of like portfolio mix that is interesting. And my view is like as long as we can continue to educate them that like those same principles exist and are supercharged in these spaces, then we're going to see more of these more of that type of economic expression happen. And we're already seeing it. So like the things that I look for are museums starting to avail themselves to these types of works. The answer is yes. I think the Chromie Squiggle is now in something like 8 or 9 major museums across the world. We're seeing regular shows and exhibitions at places like the MoMA and LACMA and others that are featuring digital art that is native to blockchains. We're starting to see some very large contemporary art collectors start spending and buying, and building their first collections. I know I see it. I talk with them. I know Eli sees it. He's helping broker some of these deals. I know Fountain very quite well, and they're on the front lines. They're facilitating some of these deals, and so I guess like the short summary is like it's working, it's happening. Things take a little bit longer than I think we'd all like, but I continue to be. I have a lot of conviction that like things are moving in the right direction.
Zen, your thoughts?
Yeah, I very much agree with that. I think it is. I mean, in 21, everyone had, like you said, this hope and dream that these massive billionaires would come in and buy everyone's bags at crazy prices. That has largely gone away, but the adoption has only increased. Seeing squiggles in museums and CryptoPunks in museums and just digital art in general in museums is nothing short of incredible to see. Takes time, like Eli was saying as well. Like there's so many hurdles that you have to sort of jump through to sort of convince or for a traditional art collector to understand and appreciate this world, because they're not on Twitter all day in Discord. They're not like us. They're coming from a very different background. They probably have busy lives. They've been collecting traditional art for decades, and it's a big jump to expect people to take. But it's happening and will take time. I think there's like two sides to the coin though as well, which is this whole new class of art collector coming up through crypto. And
Yeah.
so on the one hand, you're waiting for, I mean, people are hoping for traditional art collectors to come in and buy their bags. But I think on the other hand, you have people who are just coming into money themselves, either because they're investing in crypto and crypto's going up, or they're just in the crypto space and they have a business or they work a job and they just get into a bit of money, and then want to spend some of that money. And they don't want to go and buy traditional art because they don't really relate to that. They relate more to the digital art. And I tell this all the time because I cannot, just the amount of people I know who like tell me one day they just wish they can finally buy a CryptoPunk. Like that's their goal. They want to
Yeah.
eventually get to a CryptoPunk. And I think CryptoPunks are firmly in the art category as well as others. But some people say they want to buy a Squiggle, they want to buy a Fidenza. These are people that probably would not have wanted to spend $50,000, $10,000, $100,000 on art outside of crypto. So I think that there's this whole new class of collector that is coming up, and really the whole art industry is just growing in terms of pure numbers of collectors and participants, which is really, to me, exciting.
Yeah, no, I 100% agree too on that last point too. Is I think it's a both and, right? Like I think we getting the traditional art collectors great, getting them the appreciation of digital art, but I think in the scheme of things, right? Like people that collect even traditional art, it's such a small percentage of the pie, right? Of all the people out there, even people that are wealthy, right? Um, so I think there's just a lot of untapped potential just in art collecting in general that in the traditional world, the logistics are a big problem, right? Like that's a lot to deal with of how to, you have to have the space to hang things, you have to, warehouse something if you are trying to go that route. digital art, especially blockchain based digital art, it kind of is very efficient in that way in collecting. And, maybe that can bring in a whole new class of collectors. It already has, but, continue that out. Obviously, big challenge to that is UX
Yeah.
and it's just still, now, years later, I don't think that UX is accessible to kind of the average person still. I think the whole wallets that, it's just scary, right? And not only scary, it takes some technical skill to figure this out and interest more than I think the average person has.
No tariffs on digital art.
Never know.
Not yet.
Yeah. Don't give anybody any ideas out there. Anyways, so I think we're getting towards the end of the show. I would love to go around the horn and, if you guys have any predictions we're not going to hold you to them. It's not financial advice, things like that. But I'm just curious of what you guys see the next, maybe a few years in the digital art market and what's going to come of that. Do you see a recovery? Do you see like to 2021? Do you see it becoming more stable, etc.? So let's start with Derek. Why don't we start with you?
Oh gosh, putting me on the hot seat here.
Someone else can go too. It doesn't if you want to pass.
Yeah,
pass it.
my predictions are they're better when they're less specific and they're more like trend focused. I'm less good at saying like marking the kind of like the specific marks that are going to happen on chain. One thing I do, maybe I'll just say like broadly speaking, on that point, just to like throw a guess out here for the audience. I feel pretty confident. I mean, we've got work that I think that let's call it like the traditional art market right now is quite soft, but we see marks where things sell regularly for 50, 100, 150 million dollars, and north of that in some cases. And I think the all-time single kind of like banner price was a Beeple object, I think for 60 million or 70 million. I can't even remember the exact number. My gut tells me we probably
It was
yeah
69 million.
Yeah, it was
69 million. That's what it was. Yeah, 69 million.
420,000. No, I don't know if it
There you go. My gut tells me that we probably see a print higher than that at some point in the next 36 months. But we'll see.
It's a bold prediction. Well, with the $6 million alien sale, with everything that's going on in the macro environment, that was pretty impressive. I didn't expect that. So, Eli, how about you?
Well, so Derek said he was going broad and not that was pretty. That was
I did it. Hey, I did it for the culture. All right, I did it for the culture.
Well, I'll go even narrower and quite specific. I think this is the Art Block show, right? I'm like just super bullish Art Blocks. I think that whole market, I'm not sort of saying anything that people don't know, is quite sort of broadly soft, as is much of the market more broadly as well. But I'm just sort of very bullish long term on Art Blocks collections. Maybe not every collection ever has 2021, 22 price appreciation again, but I think there's a core number of collections there that over a very long time horizon will be incredibly meaningful to the contemporary art world and by extension to the art market.
Yeah, agree with that 100%. I think what Art Blocks has done as far as on-chain art and what it's done for generative art, it can't be understated. I don't think it's been realized, and I think it will be realized in the future. So I agree with that. How about you, Zeneca?
Yeah,
Last but not
also
least.
crazy bullish art blocks. I think the impact that they have had and will continue to have is can't be understated. It's it transcends so much of like what most people see in terms of on-chain price action and things like that. There's a lot of behind-the-scenes work that is happening again with museums and a lot of other important institutions. In terms of predictions, I'm actually going to stick to not going narrow because I'm terrible with predictions too. But I will say that like I guess two things. One is people often ask, like, are we going to get another 2021 season? I think he's going to return to that era, and I just can't imagine that possibly happening to that just to that same level, because it was so crazy that like everything was pumping at the same time. I think we'll see elements of 21 in terms of certain collections, certain pockets, certain niches within NFTs, whether it's X copy art or generative art or art blocks or this, that, or the other, will from time to time outperform in some cases significantly. And I think that is kind of what to look out for, rather than hoping we get back to the 2021 days when you throw a dart at a dartboard and it would 10x overnight. Those days are probably largely behind us, which is, it's just what it is. And it's a healthy part of, markets and efficiencies and things like that. And the other thing I'll say is I've I'd be curious to know if others agree, but like I've been sensing that the art market is kind of turning around a little bit. Like, NFTs and ETH especially is like kind of depressed right now. We're in this like not a great space, both price wise and just like people's emotions in respect to the whole thing. But there've been a steady stream of sales, like so many X copy sales just in the last few days. A lot of collections have been holding up well. In ETH terms, CryptoPunks are just trending upwards as well. So I think that I hate to call bottoms, but it kind of feels like we might be close to this area where like we maybe have finally run out of sellers and people are just like now buying and collecting yeah, there's something happening. At least I feel like something's happening.
Raven, can I double click into that for a moment?
Yeah. Go ahead, Eli.
Yeah. I mean, so you said Zeneca sort of running out of sellers. From my purview, it's really interesting to see some churn from the sort of 21, 22 class of some of these collections, art blocks maybe in particular, but also Xcopy and autoglyphs, into a new collector class who was maybe more PFP focused over the last several years. There's a number of large Azuki collectors who are now sort of building art collections. So that transition and that dynamic, I think, is very, very interesting, and it's ongoing. It's happening right now, where, as you said, Zeneca, I think like we're seeing that churn out, and ultimately that's very healthy for the composition of all of those collections and more broadly for the market.
That's great.
Can I have one more thought on
Yeah,
this? Because I
Derek,
think
go
it's a
ahead.
fun conversation. Not to have the last word. I'm agreeing with both of these guys. I think like maybe like something that I like to say a lot is like this concept of like network digital objects, few external dependencies, and like
Yeah.
those two prongs are actually like two sides of a very valuable coin. It's like um, I think like a good comp here would be something like Bitcoin, right? So like as Bitcoin grows, that network grows. That attention in that network starts to kind of like reflect price, and people get confidence in that price because there really is an execution risk. It's very much like this digital commodity, very similar to gold. And like if you chart out gold, I mean, like gold has just been on a ripper, right? Like it's
Yeah.
in times of kind of like let's call it like macro uncertainty. People want to feel secure and preserve wealth and store value, and they do it through vehicles like real estate or gold or art. And it has been interesting. It's certainly not to that degree, but it has been interesting behaviorally to see some of like the, let's call it enthusiasm around wealth preservation around gold and Bitcoin start to kind of like tail out to things like crypto art with no external dependencies. And so things with that are purely on chain. So like, I mean, Artblocks has done a lot of work on both of those two things, right? Like these are generative art is fundamentally networked, right? Like these are multiple objects that allow many people to come around and kind of like kickstart and proselytize like a network around this thing. But then the design decisions that Eric put into the project, which is like resolution independency, like no dependencies outside of some very core ones, and like these, and the fact that these are art objects at the end of the day, without like teams kind of like providing value to them in perpetuity. It's not surprising to see, to Eli and Zen's point, like there is enthusiasm and kind of like a bottoming that's been happening, I think, if you've been paying attention. So I think we're seeing it with punks, we're seeing it with glyphs, we're seeing it with squiggles, we're seeing it with like the tail of art blocks and super rare and X copy pieces and people and others, of course. And I think it's definitely something to keep an eye on.
Amazing. Well, it's been a great show. This is, I think, a good point to wrap up. I want to thank all the guests here today that came and gave their insight. You guys are great, and you're always the people I look to really get a sense of this market and crypto in general. And it's just great to hang with you guys and see you at events, see you in Marfa, etc. So it's been great to catch up, and I'm sure everyone that's listening, we got a lot of great content out of it. So thank you all for tuning in, and also for the panelists here for showing up.
Love
Thanks,
it.
guys.
Thank you
very
guys.
much.
All
Thanks
right,
so much,
we'll do this
everyone.
again sometime soon. So take care, everyone. See ya.
Take care, crew.
Yeah.